Hey, my name is Owen Bennett. I'm 33 years old and I live in Cleveland, Ohio, in a house that's too big for one man and too quiet for anyone else. I'm a structural engineer. My father started Bennett and Hale on the ninth floor of an old bank building on Superior Avenue, and when he died 2 years ago, he left me half a company, a room full of hand drawn blueprints, and a partner I never would have chosen. I stay late. That's the simplest way to explain my life. I stay until the lights on the other floors go dark one by one, until the parking garage echoes when I finally walk to my car. And every single night for 1 year, a woman came into my office with a cart and a gray uniform and quietly put my world back in order, while I pretended not to notice her. I never asked her name, not once. I told myself I was being respectful. I told myself I was busy. The truth is uglier than that, and I didn't understand how ugly until the night I stood in the dark of the break room and heard her voice through the wall, low and tired, on the phone. She said, "A year, Grandma. I've cleaned that man's office every single night for a year." Then she was quiet for a second, and she laughed in a way that wasn't a laugh at all, and she said the sentence that broke something open in my chest. "He doesn't even know my name." I stood there in the dark. I didn't move. I had signed drawings that held up 8-story buildings, and I couldn't hold one small fact about the woman who emptied my trash every night at 9:15. But let me take you back, because that sentence wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the middle. The beginning was 2 years earlier in a hospital hallway in November when my father's heart stopped in the middle of a sentence about a bridge. He was 71. He was telling me about a footbridge he designed in 1986 that they were finally tearing down. How nothing built by human hands is supposed to last forever, and then he stopped talking and the monitor changed its sound, and everything I understood about my life reorganized itself around one missing person. My mother died when I was 19. My engagement ended 6 months before my father did, when Claire packed a bag and told me, without cruelty, that she'd spent 3 years falling asleep alone in a house with a man who was always at the office. She wasn't wrong. I watched her carry her plants out to her car, then drove to work and stayed until 2 in the morning, which I understand now was exactly her point. So when my father died, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I worked. I took his desk, his chair, his half of the company, and I stopped noticing anything that wasn't a load calculation. Preston Hale took the other half. He was the son of my father's partner, 41, and good at every part of the business I hated. He shook hands, he remembered golf handicaps, he wore suits that cost more than my first car, and had a way of saying, "Owen, buddy," that made me feel like I was about to be handed a bill. But he brought in the work, and the work paid 42 salaries, so I signed what needed signing and told myself that was a partnership. Which brings me to her. She started the January after my father died, when the cleaning contract changed hands and the new crew came through at a different hour. I looked up one night at 9:15 and there was a woman in my doorway with a cart and an apologetic expression. "I can come back," she said. "You're fine," I said without looking up. That was our entire relationship for a very long time. She'd knock softly on the doorframe. I'd say, "Go ahead," or sometimes nothing at all. Just a wave of my hand I'm ashamed of now. She never touched my drawings, not once, except to square them so the corners lined up with the edge of the desk, a thing my father used to do, which I never told her about, and which she somehow started doing anyway. When I fell asleep at my desk that first winter, I'd wake at midnight with the overhead lights off and only my lamp on and my coat draped over the chair beside me. I told myself it was the security guard. It was not the security guard. There was a sad little pothos on my windowsill that I killed twice and that came back both times, and I remember thinking pothos are apparently very hard to kill. There was a night in March when the heat failed and I looked up to find a space heater running quietly under my desk that I had absolutely not put there. I noticed all of it. I just never connected any of it to a person. And that's the part I'd want you to understand. If you've ever been taken care of without noticing, it isn't that you don't see the kindness, it's that you let yourself believe kindness is weather, something that just happens with nobody's hands on it. Her hands were on all of it. Her name was Nora Vance, and I learned it from a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a Thursday in early February. We had a deadline on Harbor Point, an 8-story building down by the water, and I'd been at my desk 14 hours. Around 10:30, I went to the break room for more coffee, didn't bother with the light, and was standing at the counter when I heard her voice through the wall. She was speaking softly, the way you do in a building where you're not supposed to make noise. "I'm okay, Grandma. I ate. I promise I ate." A pause. "No, I'm still on 9. It's quiet up here." Another pause, and then something changed in her voice, a tiredness that had been folded up all day and was finally being set down. "There's a man who works late on this floor. I've cleaned his office every night for a year." "A year, Grandma." Silence. "No, he's not rude. He's just—" She stopped, started again. "He doesn't even know my name." I want to tell you that I walked out and introduced myself right then. I didn't. I stood there with my hands on the counter and my ears burning, and I listened to her tell her grandmother to take the blue pill and not the white one, and I heard her cartwheels squeak away down the hall. When I finally came out, my office was already clean. My drawings were squared, the lamp was on, she was 2 doors down, and I walked to that doorway and stood in it like a man who has forgotten how to speak English. She looked up, dark hair pulled back, tired eyes, a small scar through one eyebrow, maybe 28 or 29, and I realized I had never actually looked at her face before, not once in a year, and the shame of it went through me like cold water. "Sorry," she said, reaching for her cart. "Am I in your way?" "No," I said. And then, because my mouth got ahead of my courage, "I'm Owen." She blinked. "I know. Your name's on the door." That should have been the moment. It wasn't. A smarter man would have said, "And what's yours?" I said, "Right, of course. Sorry to bother you," and walked back to my office and stared at a rebar schedule for 40 minutes without reading a single number on it. Here's the thing about being a coward in a small, quiet way. Nobody catches you. You just carry it. I carried it for exactly 1 week. The next Thursday, I stayed at my desk on purpose. 9:15 came. She knocked on the door frame. "I can come back," she said. "Actually," I said, and I stood up, which surprised both of us. And then I said, "I'm sorry. I've been working on this floor with you for a year, and I've never asked your name. And last week I heard you say that, and I felt like garbage every day since." Her face did 4 things at once: surprise, embarrassment, something harder, like a door being checked to see if it was locked, and then a kind of tired amusement. "You heard that." I wasn't trying to. I was standing in the dark break room like a raccoon. "I didn't want to turn on the light and startle you," I said, which, in hindsight, was a worse plan. She laughed, a real one, short and surprised, and I hadn't made anyone laugh in about 2 years, and I felt it land somewhere in my chest and stay there. "Nora," she said. "Nora Vance." "Nora," I said. "I'm sorry." "It's not a big deal." "It is, though," I said. "You've been taking care of me, the lamp, the coat, the space heater in March." She looked at the floor. "You were asleep at your desk with your mouth open. It was upsetting." "Thank you," I said, "for all of it. It's my job. Squaring my drawings isn't your job." She was quiet for a second, then she said, "No. That's just because it bothered me. The corners were crooked." And that was the sentence that changed everything, though neither of us knew it yet, because a woman who is bothered by crooked drawing corners is not a woman who came to that floor by accident. I started paying attention after that, the way a man does when he's walked past a window for a year and suddenly looks through it. She always had a book in the pocket of her cart, and I began, in the manner of a subtle and sophisticated adult, to squint at the cover. Structural Analysis, a used textbook with a cracked spine and 400 sticky tabs sticking out of it like feathers. "That's a strange choice for the night shift," I said one evening. "It's a strange choice for anything. Are you taking a class?" I was, a while ago. "How long a while?" She stopped wiping the table. 7 years. I had 3 semesters left of civil engineering at Akron. My mom got sick, then she died, and there was nobody left to take care of my grandmother but me. School costs money and care costs more, so she shrugged. And the shrug was the worst part, because she'd clearly practiced it. So I clean offices at night and work at a garden center on weekends. And my grandmother lives in a memory care place in Parma that costs 4,200 a month. And I read the textbook because I'm not ready to admit I'm never going to finish. I said, 3 semesters. That's nothing. That's $41,000, she said, and went back to wiping the table. There's a specific silence that happens when someone tells you the truth about their life and you realize you have no right to be comfortable in the room. Then I said, "What was your favorite class?" She looked at me like she was checking again for a trap. Steel design, reinforced concrete second. Concrete's better. Concrete's a liar, she said. It cracks and then pretends it didn't. I laughed out loud, and she smiled at the table, and that was the night we became something other than two people who shared a floor. She started staying a few extra minutes. I started making a second cup of coffee at 9 without deciding to. She'd stand at the edge of my drafting table with her hands in her pockets and look at whatever I was killing myself over. And one night in late March, she pointed at a beam schedule and said, "That's wrong." I turned around. "Excuse me?" The transfer beam on grid 4. She wasn't touching the paper. She was pointing an inch above it, the way careful people do. It's carrying the columns above, but the depth is the same as your typical beams. Either your loads are wrong or the depth is. I looked at it for 11 seconds, then another 30. Then I sat down slowly because she was right, and that drawing had gone out 4 days earlier with my seal on it. "Nora," I said. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have. You just saved me $200,000 and probably my license," I said. "Don't apologize, ever, in this building, to me." She stood there holding a spray bottle and looking absolutely stunned to be told she was right about something. I have thought about that expression a great deal since. That was the night I stopped being polite and started being interested. I asked what she'd do with the beam. She told me, and she was right about that too. And by 11:30, we were both leaning over the table with a red pencil and her cart abandoned in the hallway, until she looked at the clock and said, "Oh my God, I have 2 floors left," and ran. I finished her 2 floors. Badly. The seventh floor filed a complaint about the bathrooms, and I've never told her. Here's where I should tell you about Preston, because Preston is the reason this story has an ending worth telling. Harbor Point was his deal. 8 stories, mixed use, a developer named Caro Group who Preston golfed with and who paid late and complained early. In April, a change order came directly from Preston's office instead of from the client, and it wasn't a design change, it was a materials change. The reinforcing in the podium transfer slab, the thick concrete floor that carries 8 stories down onto a garage with big open spans, had been reduced. Number 8 bars at 6 inches had become number 6 bars at 10 inches. To a normal person, that's gibberish. To me, it read like a note saying we've decided to replace the elevator cables with kite string. I walked into Preston's office with the sheet in my hand. "Who approved this?" "Value engineering," he said, without looking up from his phone. "Caro's over budget. This is less steel in a slab that's carrying a building." "Owen, buddy," he put the phone down and gave me the smile. "It was reviewed. By who?" And I watched a man decide how much truth to hand over. "A consultant, out of state, it's within tolerance." "Show me the calculations. I'll get them to you." He never got them to me. I want to be honest here, because it would be easy to tell you I was a hero from the beginning. I wasn't. I asked twice more. I sent an email. I told myself I'd chase it down after the deadline, and the deadline moved, and it got to be May. That is how buildings fall down. Not because of villains, because of tired men who mean to follow up. What broke it open was Nora. She was in my office on a Tuesday night in May, while I was down in the archive room hunting for one of my father's old details, and she did what she always did, which was square the corners. Then she stopped because the top sheet was the revised slab plan. I came back up and found her standing very still. "Owen," she said. It was the first time she'd used my first name. "Who changed this slab? How do you know it was changed?" "Because the drawing's dated April, but the schedule references a detail that doesn't exist anymore." And because you don't put number 6 bars at 10 inches in a transfer slab under 8 stories, not with those spans. I don't even have a degree, and I know that. I know, I said. Then why is it in the set? And I told her. All of it. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said quietly, "How many people are going to live in that building?" "About 200. Then you have to stop it. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. She wasn't loud. She never got loud. She just got very precise. You have a stamp. Use it or don't, but don't stand in the middle. Nobody had spoken to me like that since my father died. I pulled out a legal pad and ran the numbers by hand, the way he taught me, and she stood beside me and checked my arithmetic. And at 1:40 in the morning, I looked up and said, "It fails. Not by a little, by 40%. She didn't say, "I told you so." She said, "Okay, what now?" Now I write it down and I send it to the client, the contractor, and the building department. And then I go to war with my own partner. She nodded, picked up her spray bottle, and said, "I'll clean around you." And she did. And it was the least lonely night I'd had in 3 years. I sent the letter on a Wednesday, 2 pages in the flat, unlovable language engineers use when they are absolutely certain the revised reinforcing in the Harbor Point podium slab was inadequate. Bennett and Hale would not certify it, and any concrete placed under that revision should be considered non-conforming. I copied the contractor, the city, and Preston. Preston came in the next morning without knocking. I'd never seen him angry before. He was always so smooth that anger looked wrong on him, like a suit that didn't fit. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I stopped a slab from failing. You put our name on a document saying our own firm issued defective drawings." "We did," I said. "You did. Over my objection. 3 times. Caro will sue us." "Caro will be very grateful in about a year," I said, "when nobody's dead." He looked around my office, and I watched him decide to change tactics. That's the thing I understand about men like Preston now. They don't argue with the point. They go looking for something soft. "You've been spending a lot of nights up here," he said, "with the cleaning girl." The room got very quiet. "Her name is Nora," I said. "I'm sure it is." He smiled with his mouth. "Be careful, Owen. People notice things. Get out of my office." He got out, and 9 days later, Nora was fired. I found out because she didn't come at 9:15. 10 came, 11. At 11:40, I went down to the loading dock and found Marisol, who ran the night crew, crying and pretending she wasn't. "They took her off the account this morning," she said. "Theft. One of the partners upstairs reported a money clip missing from his desk. $800 in it. They pulled the badge logs, and she was the only one on that floor between 6 and midnight, and they found it in the bottom of her cart during the spot check." I felt the floor tilt. "Which partner?" She wouldn't say it. She didn't have to. "Marisol. Which partner?" "Mr. Hale," she said. I have never wanted to hit anyone the way I wanted to hit Preston Hale that night. Instead, I drove to an apartment building in Old Brooklyn at midnight with an address I got by begging Marisol, and knocked on a door until a woman I barely knew opened it with her eyes swollen from crying. She looked at me and immediately tried to fix her face. That's what killed me. Standing in her own doorway at midnight after being called a thief, and her first instinct was to make it easier for me. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know what he did." "It doesn't matter what he did." She wrapped her arms around herself. "It's in the file. Meridian has a zero-tolerance policy. I won't get another cleaning contract in this city. I called my grandmother's place today and asked what happens if I'm 2 weeks late, and the woman was very nice about it, which was worse. I have $1,100, she said. I know exactly how many days that is. I've known exactly how many days it is for 7 years. Then she stopped trying to fix her face, and I stood in that hallway and watched a woman apologize for crying, and something in me that had been asleep since my father died stood all the way up. "Come stay at my house," I said. She laughed wetly. "Absolutely not. There's a carriage house over the garage. Kitchen, bathroom, its own door, its own lock. My father built it for my grandmother in 1994, and nobody's lived in it since 2011. You'd never have to see me if you didn't want to." Owen, and I need a hand, I said, which was true and which I'd been thinking about for 6 weeks. My father left 1,200 sets of hand drawn drawings in a room downtown with no index and no digital copies. 40 years of work. If the sprinklers ever go off, it's gone. I've been putting it off since the funeral because I can't make myself sit in that room. 22 an hour. It's not charity. It's a job I need done, and you're the only person I know who'd understand what she was looking at. She stood in the doorway a long time. Behind her was a very small apartment with a folded blanket on the couch and one framed photo of a woman who had to be her mother. Why are you doing this? Because you told me to use my stamp, I said. And because for a year you kept a light on for a man who never asked your name, and I'm not going to be that man twice. She pressed her lips together. I'd pay rent, real rent, not pretend rent. Fine. And I don't want to be the woman people talk about. Then we'll be very boring. I'm extremely good at boring. She moved in on a Saturday with 4 boxes, a lamp, and the textbook. The carriage house had a leak I didn't know about, and a wasp nest I definitely didn't know about. And we spent the first afternoon on both, and at some point I looked over and she was on a ladder in the June sun with a scarf around her hair, laughing at me because I'd run into the yard. And I remember thinking very clearly, oh no, because that's how it happens, not in a thunderstorm, on a ladder, on a Saturday, with a wasp problem. The archive was worse than I'd promised. 1,140 sets, some so brittle the corners came off in your hand. She built a system in 4 days that I wouldn't have thought of in 4 months, with a column she added on her own called What It Teaches You, because an archive that only says what was built is a warehouse, and one that says why is a library. My father's handwriting was in every margin. At night, she'd come up to the house and we'd eat at the kitchen island, and she'd tell me what she'd found. A 1991 detail for a church roof with a note that said, "This will hold, but it will not sing. Try again." He got humbler over the years, she said one night. He got tired. No, look at the joints. Tired men don't draw joints like that. He got humbler. I had to leave the room for a minute after she said that. In August, I signed her up to finish her degree. I didn't tell her first, which was a mistake, and we had our first real fight about it. And she was right, and I was wrong, and I'd do it again. She stood in my kitchen with the letter in her hand and said, "You can't buy my life for me, Owen. It's a loan. I wrote it up. 8 years, no interest. It's on the counter. Read it." She read it. Her hands were shaking. Why 8 years? Because that's how long it took my father to pay off the loan his own boss gave him in 1979, I said. The man never mentioned it again, not once. The only thing he ever asked for was that Dad do it for somebody else someday. She set the letter down on the counter very carefully, like it might break. And that's me? I'm the somebody else? No, I said. And I heard myself say the rest of it before I had decided to. You're the person I think about when I wake up. The loan is separate. The loan is a thing I'd do for a stranger with your brain. But I want to be very clear that I am not being kind to you, Nora. I passed kind about 3 months ago, and I've been lying about it since. She stared at me. The refrigerator hummed. Okay, she said. Okay, okay, I heard you. And I need you to not say anything else right now, because I live above your garage and I owe you money and my whole life is held together with tape. And if I let myself feel what I want to feel tonight, I won't be able to tell later whether I meant it or whether I was drowning. That is, I think, the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me. Take your time, I said. I'm not going anywhere. I'm extremely well known for never going anywhere. She smiled at the counter. One condition. Don't be nice to me in front of Preston Hale. She had good reasons for that condition. Preston spent the summer building a story, and he was very good at building things that weren't real. That I'd had a breakdown after my father's death. That I was sabotaging our biggest client. That everything I said about Harbor Point came from a man involved with a cleaning woman who stole from the office.
In September, Caro's lawyers sent a demand letter for $400,000 in delay costs. In October, Preston filed to dissolve the partnership, which would have forced a sale of everything my father built. And in the middle of it, Meridian sent Nora a letter saying the theft report had gone to the county for possible prosecution. She read it at my kitchen table and didn't say a word for 10 minutes. It's $800, she said finally. It's not about the money. I know exactly what it's about. She folded the letter along its creases, over and over, until it was a small, hard square. He's using me to make you look stupid, and if I go away, you look less stupid. Nora. I'm just doing the math. Don't. I do the math, she said. It's the only thing I've ever been good at. Here's what saved us, and it wasn't me. It was a field engineer named Danny Ruiz who worked for the concrete contractor and had a habit of photographing everything. My letter stopped the pour in May, but part of that slab had gone in back in March, and Danny had hundreds of time-stamped photos of the mats as they were laid. The spacing matched neither drawing, not the original, not the revision. It was worse than both. Somebody had ordered a second reduction in the field, verbally, and it had never been drawn at all. The city ordered core samples in November. I stood on that slab on a gray morning with the wind coming off the lake and watched a technician pull them, and when the results came back, the steel was 38% short of the original design. 200 apartments were going to sit on that. The hearing was set for the second week of December. Not a criminal trial, folding chairs and bad fluorescent light at the county administration building, convened by the building department with the state board present, and it was going to decide who was responsible and whose license was in danger. Preston's lawyers subpoenaed a list of everyone who had ever had access to the ninth floor. Nora's name was on it. On the Sunday before the hearing, I came home at 6 and the light in the carriage house was off. There was an envelope taped to my kitchen window with my name on it in her small square drafting hand. Inside was a check for $400, every cent she had, and a note. I signed the loan papers back over. Don't fight me on this. If I'm not there, he doesn't get to hold me up in that room, and you get to just be an engineer who was right. Tell your father's archive I'm sorry I didn't finish. Tell it that I loved it. A year earlier, I would have let her go. I'd have read that note and told myself she'd made her choice, and I'd have gone to the office and worked until 2 in the morning and called that dignity. Instead, I stood in my kitchen and said, out loud, to nobody, no. The bus station on Chester Avenue at 9 o'clock on a December night is one of the loneliest places in America. She was in the third row of blue plastic seats with one duffel bag and the textbook in her lap, and she saw me come through the doors and her whole face crumpled. Don't, she said. I'm going to say it in a bus station. Owen, you are not a liability, I said. You're the reason I found it. You're the reason that slab isn't holding 200 families up right now. You stood in my office with a spray bottle in your hand and you told me to use my stamp. And if you get on that bus, then a man with a nice watch and a bad character gets to decide who I am for the rest of my life. And I have to sit in my father's chair with that. So no, you don't get to protect me by disappearing. Nobody in this family gets to do that anymore. She stared at me. This family, she repeated, that's the part you're going to argue with? Then she started to cry, right there under the departure board, and I sat down beside her, and she put her forehead against my shoulder, and a man across the aisle quietly moved 2 seats away to give us room, and I have never forgotten him. I'm so tired, she said. I've been tired since I was 22. If I stay and it goes badly and you lose everything, then I'll have lost everything with somebody in the house, I said, which is more than I had last year. She laughed into my coat. Then she sat up, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and said, the bus was going to Columbus anyway. I don't even know anybody in Columbus. We drove home. She talked the whole way, faster than I'd ever heard her talk, and by the time we pulled into the driveway, she was gripping the door handle and saying, Owen, pull up the badge logs, right now. Here's what she'd remembered. The night the money clip disappeared, she hadn't been on 9 between 6 and midnight at all. She'd been up there 20 minutes at 5:30 because Marisol asked her to swap floors with Devin, then worked 5 all night. Her badge went through the ninth floor reader at 5:41. Preston's went through it at 5:58, a problem for a man who told an investigator he last saw the clip on his desk at 7, with the floor empty except for the cleaner. We had the logs by Monday morning. Marisol signed a statement about the swap. So did Devin. The hearing lasted 2 days. I'll spare you most of it, because most of a hearing is paper. But I'll tell you about the 3rd hour of the 2nd day. Preston's attorney was a polished man named Vaughn who said Mr. Bennett like a diagnosis, and he spent an hour establishing that I was grief-stricken and unstable, and then he pivoted, exactly the way we knew he would. Mr. Bennett, is it true that the person who first identified the alleged discrepancy in the transfer slab was not a licensed engineer? That's correct. Was she an employee of your firm? Was not? What was her position? And I looked at that man and said, clearly into the microphone, she was the night custodian on our floor. Her name is Nora Vance. She has 91 credit hours toward a civil engineering degree, and she found an error that 4 licensed professionals, including me, had signed off on. If the board is looking for the person who kept an 8-story building off a deficient slab, they're looking for her, and I'd appreciate it if you said her name correctly. There was a small sound in the room, not applause, just 40 people shifting and folding chairs at once. Vaughn tried to get to the theft. He got one sentence in before the hearing officer, a woman named Delacroix, who'd been silent for a day and a half, said, "Counselor, I have the badge records in front of me. Unless you'd like me to read the times into the record, move on." He moved on. Preston testified after lunch. He was excellent for about 11 minutes. Then they asked for the out-of-state consultant's calculations, and he said they'd been misplaced, and Delacroix asked for the consultant's name and license number, and the board staff looked it up in real time, and the license had lapsed in 2016. The room went very quiet. Preston's face went the color of drywall. He looked over at me, and for 1 second, there was nothing on it. No smile, no charm, just a man watching the floor go out from under him, and I did not enjoy it as much as I expected to. The findings came out in January. The revised reinforcing was found grossly inadequate. Preston's license was revoked. The matter went to the county prosecutor, and the dissolution filing collapsed with it. Caro settled and then hired us to redesign the podium because the world is deeply unserious. Meridian withdrew the theft report and sent Nora a letter with the word regrettably in it 4 times. She used it as a bookmark, which is the most graceful revenge I have ever witnessed. Nora went back to school in the spring, 12 credits, 25 hours a week in the archive, and every Sunday with her grandmother, who called me the tall one for 2 years before she settled on Owen. What Nora needed wasn't rescuing. It was somebody who kept the coffee going and asked good questions about steel connections at 11 at night, which, it turns out, is the exact thing I am for. I kissed her for the first time in the archive room in March, between shelves 11 and 12, 1993 on one side of us and 1994 on the other. She had a pencil behind her ear and dust on her sleeve, and I said, "Can I?" And she said, "Yes," before I finished. Then she said, "That took you 11 months. I wanted to be sure you weren't drowning." "I stopped drowning in August," she said, very quietly, "in your kitchen." She moved out of the carriage house in June, which sounds like the wrong direction until I tell you she moved into the house. She paid the loan back in 6 years instead of 8, in monthly transfers with the memo line filled out, because she is the kind of person who fills out memo lines. She graduated on a Saturday in May, her grandmother in the second row in a wheelchair and a corsage. No idea what was happening, but a very firm grip on my hand. And when they read her name, I heard a sound come out of me that I did not authorize. I married her the following September in the backyard, under the same tree the wasps had made such a fuss about. Her vows were 4 sentences long, and the third one took her a while to get out. She said, "For a year, I thought I was invisible in that building. It turned out I was just early." We have a daughter now. Her name is June. She is 4. She is loud, and she has been to the 9th floor more times than most of our employees. The sign in the lobby says Bennett and Vance because Nora refused to put Bennett on the door even though she took it everywhere else. "Nobody's going to look at that sign and think the second name got there by marriage," she said. That's a promise to some 22-year-old walking past. Preston Hale sells commercial real estate in Charlotte now. He sent a card when June was born. I didn't answer it, and I'm still not sure whether that was strength or the other thing. The archive is finished, and sometimes I go down and read my father's handwriting in the margins. "This will hold, but it will not sing. Try again. There's one more thing. Every year on the 4th of February, we do something a little stupid. We drive downtown after dinner, go up to the 9th floor, and stand in the doorway of my office, and at exactly 9:15 she knocks on the doorframe with her knuckles, twice, softly, the way she used to. And I put down whatever I'm holding, and I look up at her, and I say the only thing I ever needed to say and didn't. I say, 'Come in, Nora,' because a year is a long time to stand in a room with someone who doesn't know your name. But the moment somebody finally says it out loud, it stops being a room you clean, and it starts being a place you live."